What will the Bush legacy be? Will it all be tied to Iraq?
Well, you know, it's interesting. It's a historical day, obviously, when you open a presidential library and institute there. And now Texas, if you look at it, has now 3 presidential libraries in it. It's got Dallas for George W. Bush, College Station for his father, and here in Austin, LBJ. And to me, if you look at what his legacy will be, I think you have to look at it in very similar ways to what happened with LBJ. And LBJ, he left office very unpopular because of the Vietnam War. And George W. Bush left his presidency very unpopular, mainly because of the Iraq War and what happened there. His numbers have improved somewhat over time, but really his legacy, I think, is still undecided, and I think it's solely contingent on what happens in Iraq over the next 15 or 20 years. If Iraq turns out to be a place where democracy emerges and then it flourishes throughout the Middle East, I think his legacy will be very positive. If that doesn't happen, I think his legacy will be negative.
Matt, President Bush in his biography had mentioned that he never wanted to be a wartime president. That's not what he was expecting. I guess no commander-in-chief is. But then 9/11 happened and he was thrust into that role. How does history remember his leadership at that time?
Well, the history remembers his leadership in that moment in the immediate aftermath of 9/11 very well. As you recall, his popularity went up to 90%, 92%, unheard of for a president. But then over time, that slowly dissipated, and by the time he got reelected, it was down to in the high 40s, mid 40s. And so I think at that moment, with the bullhorn moment that we all remember well, standing on top of the rubble, people remember it fondly. But the aftermath of it, where we have thousands of soldiers who have died, and we've spent nearly $1 trillion, and it still looks like Iraq is a bit disorganized at best, I think it's still an unknown question. Hit that time and that moment at 9/11, I remember it so well. His entire presidency changed in 24 hours. We didn't even ask in a poll that we had done in days before 9/11, we didn't ask a single question on foreign policy or national security, and then one day his presidency changed.
Matt, Mr. Bush said today one of the benefits of freedom is that people can disagree. It's fair to say I created plenty of opportunities to exercise that right, but politics were on hold today, were they not?
Oh, absolutely. We're on hold from everybody, from Republicans and Democrats. I mean, obviously you have 5 presidents gather, 3 of which are Democrats, 2 of which are Republicans. They gathered. They understand the stresses and what it takes in office, and they also understand of the importance of a library and an institute in the aftermath to try to tell the story about what happened in those 8 years in the time of the presidents. You recall, a majority of presidents don't have presidential libraries. It's only of recent vintage that presidents have started establishing these libraries. But all politics is put on hold in order to sort of say, let's take a moment, let's reflect on what's gone on, let's honor the fact that this person led this country at this time. Even if we don't like him, let's honor the fact that he was the leader of this country at a very important moment in time.
Matt, you know President George W. Bush very well. You worked in the administration. President Obama, President Clinton were both keen to praise him and both say that he loves this country and that he is a decent man. Why does this only happen at events like this? What is so happen or so wrong with our politics that it only comes to dedications when we have talk like this?
Well, that's a very good question, Mark, and it's an unfortunate situation. It's only in some major crisis or a major celebratory event like this that you actually see people gather around, put politics aside, and talk about what's in the best interest in the country. And I have to say, President Obama did something I think very positive today, which he said is if immigration reform passes, which, as you know, as of today, looks like it may pass the Senate and pass Congress for the first time. President Obama said that if immigration reform passes, it will be because of George W. Bush and what he did in his presidency to try to push that along. So politics is put aside at a moment like this. We wish it could continue on in Washington, but probably tomorrow or the next day we're going to go right back into that polarized, divisive conversation.
President Bush does not miss politics. He mentioned that today, and he has mentioned that in the past. I believe the term he used was he doesn't miss the swamp. If you're a former president, how difficult is it for you to stand back and let the current commander-in-chief do his or her job? He has been very, very quiet, and he's been very respectful in allowing Barack Obama to do his job.
Yeah, President Bush actually has been more quiet and more reserved in the course of after his presidency than any other president that I have seen in the last 30 or 40 years when they've left office. all of them take a step backwards. But President Bush took 5 steps backwards. He really, this is his first real public speech and public foray since he left office almost 5 years ago. And I think he's done that pointedly to say, listen, I don't want to undermine the current president, President Obama. I don't want to criticize my party. And the only way I get in the news is if I try to undermine President Obama or I try to undermine Republican Party. And he said he has no desire to do either one of those. My guess is this is the most you'll see of Bush for now over the course of the next few years. I don't expect this to be some big jumping off point. I expect him to do this and then go back to the way where he was, which is a step back and let President Obama lead the country.